Rabbi Kenigsberg.
Yeah.
Can I just ask you a question on how we finished off last week, last year? Not that I'm expecting a full answer, and that is that we said that a Beis Din which kills somebody more than once in 70 years is a problem with the Beis Din. And one of the Tanoim said afterwards, he said, no, we must enforce this rule, otherwise there'll be hefker in society. But it means that for a numerous number of people, they get off.
Fine, welcome back.
They get off the death penalty because we're so careful not to kill somebody who shouldn't be killed. So we said, well, what happens to these people? Henry asked, what happens to these people who we know really are potentially guilty, but they get off? So it was suggested that they get put into prison and gradually get starved to death. But that would be a very strong deterrent against somebody killing somebody. It sounds a much worse punishment than just killing somebody 1, 2, 3. Here it's a lingering death. But the Tana said, we're worried that the people will not be discouraged from killing, but they would be discouraged from killing if they were ended up in jail and get starved to death.
Right. So what you're referring to is what the Gemara in Sanhedrin talks about. It calls machnisim lekippah. When we learn Sanhedrin, we'll get to that.
It's because of the deterrent.
Yeah, I mean, the truth is that there are 3 different opinions in the Mishnah there. There's an opinion that says that once in 7 years is sufficient, opinion that says once in 70 years, and there's an opinion that never ever should the Sanhedrin execute the death penalty, and it's according to that machloket. But that's precisely what the machloket is between the Tanaim, meaning there are those who say, no, you should never do it. There needs to be a deterrent. And then that would be the rebuttal to say there could still be a deterrent without actually executing the death penalty in this way. Again, how often did it ever happen? How many times did the Sanhedrin execute this? I don't know. I don't know if we have historical records that would indicate that to us. But yeah, meaning everybody would agree on that principle that there needs to be in some way a deterrent. And I think, it's an important point as well to mention nowadays, especially when, you hear a lot about this in the news and in the politics, and they talk about, Medinat Halakha and is the halachic state. I may at some point give a series of shiurim on this. I think they're very interesting. But it's tragic, I think, that in common, in modern discourse, the phrase Medinat Halakha has become, almost like a curse word. And you hear people talking about it, you hear politicians talking about it, you hear Rabbanim talking about it, saying, of course we don't want a Medinat Halakha. Well, if when you say Medinat Halakha, you mean we want a society that is run according to Torah values, right? Torah values of justice and compassion and equality and rights and emunah and faith and all of those things, and we want our lives to be guided by Torah, of course we want that. Every single, everybody wants that. But unfortunately, people have the wrong impression. People think that when you say Medinat Halakha, it means you're going to be stoning people in the streets and it's going to be like Iran. Of course, it does not mean that. So the principles here, and everybody agrees. We talk a lot about the 4 types of mitot Beit Din and Perek and Chenek and skila and we talk about Makkot. I mean, this is our whole Masechet. We talk about these punishments. Again, first of all, it's important to clarify. Nobody thinks these things would apply nowadays. Nobody thinks it would apply nowadays without a Sanhedrin. We're still very far away from that. And therefore wouldn't be. And as we've discussed, even when you have a Sanhedrin, how often would it happen that people would be put to death, right? It does not happen very often. All the Tanaim agree on that. It does not happen very often. How often is not very often, and how long does it have to happen? We know of 2 cases in the Torah. There was different. There was a specific nebuah that was given to say that it should be the case of the Mokoshesh Etzim and the case of the Mekalel, who were put to death. But again, the primary understanding of these azharot and of these onashim and of these punishments that we have in the Torah is it's there to teach us about the severity of these things. So people think nowadays that you can do whatever you want and there are no consequences and there's no impact. There is a consequence, there's an impact, whether in practical terms, right? As the Beit Din now isn't meant to go and execute this punishment, the answer most of the time, right, is no. But exactly how and when that takes place, that's the discussion over there.
Could you have a situation as people just walk free?
What do you mean?
In other words, well, they're accused of the crime of murder. And after the Hakira, it's decided there isn't enough evidence, but you really know deep down in your heart these people are guilty, and they just get off. It doesn't sound feasible. It's like,
so again, the Gemara Sanhedrin talks about that. But what we've seen in our Masechet is that. So first of all, you're right in terms of in order to execute these very serious punishments, the Torah needs to, there needs to be absolute, incontrovertible evidence. That's number one. Number two, in terms of a modern society, we have things like prison, etc. Those kind of punishments, do those square up with the Torah values? So there are some very interesting articles that have been written in the last 70 years or so, discussing whether nowadays, right now that we have a modern justice system, which includes prison and all sorts of things, which are not mentioned in the Torah, is there room to include that in a Torah system? And there are authorities who feel that there is. And number three, what I would say is that one of the things that we see that there's a principle that goes throughout, saying that there is hashkacha in terms of what takes place in Beit Din. Right? We saw earlier on the case of the Yer Miklat, when somebody we discussed the issue of why on the other side of the Yarden there were just as many Arei Miklat as there were on the east as there were on the west, even though there was a smaller population. And we said over there because you had more Rotzchim. And then we asked the question, the Gemara asked and Tosfot asked, which was, why is it if you have more Rotzchim b'Mezid, why should there be more Arei Miklat? Because we learned in detail that the Yer Miklat is for Rotzchim b'Shogeg. And one of the answers, Tosfot, or the Gemara gave a case where you have somebody who's a Rotzech b'Mezid and a Rotzech b'Shogeg, and neither of them had their punishment because there was lack of evidence or whatever else. So heaven arranges it in such a way that the one who was the murderer b'Shogeg will accidentally fall on top of the murderer b'Mezid and will kill him. So and then he'll go into Galut and he'll receive his death penalty. So there is an understanding that so long as the system put in place works according to the rules it's meant to, that the Cheshbonot will get worked out from above as well. Okay, but
thank you very much.
Pleasure. So let's go back into our Gemara where we were where we left off last week. So we're on Daf Yud Chet Amud Aleph now. We're in the third Perek. No longer dealing with Yarei Miklat, we're dealing with the Makkot. In the third Perek, Daf Yud Chet Amud Aleph, we spoke about. You remember we saw the Braita, we saw Rabbi Shimon. We won't go through that again. The 5 different limudim Rabbi Shimon learned out from the Braita, and then we had the following case. We had the case. Rava told us of a case where somebody goes through in one action would get 5 sets of Makkot, or would transgress 5 different prohibitions. There was a bit of a machloket here how to understand it precisely. Is it, even though it says lokeh chamesh, does that mean he actually gets 5 sets of lashes, or is just to say there are 5 prohibitions? But essentially, what are the 5 prohibitions? Again, let's just see. So we're on Yud Chet Amud Aleph, about 4 or 5 lines down. We said, Gufa marava zar she'achal min ha'olah lifnei zrika chutz lachoma Rabbi Shimon lokeh chamesh. Right. So you have somebody who is a zar, he's a non-kohen. He's eating an olah. So one is not allowed to eat an olah. A non-kohen, or the more so, is not allowed to eat it. To eat it outside the walls of Yerushalayim, to eat it outside the Mishkan itself, outside the Azara, and to eat it before Zrikat Adam. Those are the 5 different lavim which one has transgressed in that one action. So then we said, V'lil Kainami. The Gemara went through, it said, is it only 5? Maybe it's more than 5. V'lil Kainami mishum v'zar lo yochal ki kodeshem. We have a pasuk telling us that a zar is not allowed to eat from the Kodesh, right? And that should be included over here as well, separate prohibition. So answered the Gemara, right? That pasuk applies, that is a separate prohibition, correct, where it was fit for the Kohanim, where the Kohanim were permitted to consume it in the first place. Here we're dealing with an olah, which the Kohanim are not allowed to consume, so that would not be that would not apply. And then we said, okay, what about from a different pasuk? Remember this pasuk, we learn here that the word basadeh is superfluous. The Torah tells us that basar treifa do not eat it in the field, meaning just as a field is outside, has no place, has no walls, outside of its place. We learn from here that you cannot eat any food which has gone outside of its place. We learn out two very interesting halachot from this. One, which is nogea to our sugya now, is that if you take basar kodshim, which kodshei kodashim, for example, which need to be eaten within the azara, and you remove them from the azara, it has gone outside of its place and it cannot be eaten. We also learn about if you have an animal which is you have an animal which is pregnant, and then that animal is shechted. If the fetus is inside the womb, right, and it was entirely inside, and that animal underwent shchita, that fetus would then be considered a ben pkua, and would become permitted by the shchita of its mother, and would not require shchita itself, unless its arm or leg or a limb went outside of the animal. That is basar shetzachutz limchitzato, went outside, and then it would be forbidden to eat. That would need shchita as well. So, but regarding the first one, so we say basar basar trefa lo tochelu. So here too you have the olah, which is outside of its area. Kevan shetzah basar chutz limchitzato ne'asar. Since this meat went outside of its designated area, it becomes forbidden. So again, answers the Gemara similar answer to what we said with the previous kasha. That we would say that there's a separate love of basar shetzachutz limchitzato when it was inside the area, that it was fit to be eaten. Yeah, too, even when it was inside, you could not eat it. So that is not a separate prohibition. Okay, number 3, second last line. Let us learn out, let us include this prohibition which was learned by Rabbi Eliezer. De'amar Rabbi Eliezer, lo yochal, or lo yachel, ki kodeshem, right? Kol, now just over the page, kol sheba kodesh pasul, ba'katuv, litain lo taseh al achilato, right? Any basar kodshim which becomes pasul from being eaten, this pasuk is said in regards to notar, and notar, which is where you have meat from the korbanot, which needs to be eaten, but within a specific time frame. And if you leave it outside beyond that time frame, that becomes notar. Literally means it's left over, and that would be forbidden. So just as we say, there any basar kodshim that becomes pasul from being eaten, so too here the olah is nifsal. You're not allowed to eat it. So why is that not a separate love? We're now on the top of Amud Bet. So yeah, that love makes sense, right? So all 3 of these answers are very, very similar. It's saying that love of basar kodshim that became pasul, that's when it was not pasul, you could have eaten it, and then it became pasul. That's a separate love to eat it. But if it was pasul in the first place, it was never kasher to be eaten, then that would not be included. Okay, so those are the 3 suggestions for additional lavim which should be included. Yeah, all 3 are rejected, as I say, for very, very similar reasons. Now comes the 4th one. We're on the 4th line of Amud Bet. Velil keinami ki'idach to Rabbi Eliezer. So say there should be additional Makkot, or there should be an additional lav for the other halacha which Rabbi Eliezer taught us, which is Titania Rabbi Eliezer Omer Kol Shu Bekalil Tihiyeh Litain Lo Taseh Al Achilato. So this is based on the pasuk that talks about the minchat kohen. Minchat kohen, when a kohen begins his service in the Beit HaMikdash, he has to bring a mincha, and this mincha offering is completely burnt. It has to be completely consumed. That is what it means, kalil tiyeh. So from the fact that the Mepharshim try and understand exactly what the drasha is here, what is superfluous. Some say from the word that it says tihiyeh, it could have just said bakalil, but that extra tihiyeh. What's that teaching? That says Rabbi Eliezer that this kalil tihiyeh teaches you not just about this case of the minchat kohen, but any case whereby you are obligated to burn something entirely on the mizbeach, we are required to burn it entirely on the mizbeach. If you were to consume it, that would be a separate lav. So we're discussing the case of olah, and olah needs to be burnt entirely on the mizbeach. So we say kalil tihiyeh. and you went and ate it. That should be the 6th lav. So Rabbi Eliezer so here says the Gemara, you're right. That is correct. You should include that. And no, Rava, when he said that it's Lokeh Chamesh, was only saying from that one pasuk. But Einachinami, there are other lavim which could be included here as well. So again, like we have many times, once the Gemara says that answer, do we accept the previous answers in the Gemara, or do we reject them? And this is a machloket rishonim. Some say no. We still say the previous 3 cases. We say those are not specific isurim in this case. It's just there is the 5 that we learned from the one pasuk, and there's the 6th one from Kalil Tiyeh. Or do we say no? We go back and we include all these other cases. So yeah, you'd actually be transgressing not 8 times or 9 times, whatever it is. But as I say, so that is a machloket whether we go back and accept those cases. Also machloket whether we mean to say that you get Makkot for each one, or that it's just an extra prohibition for each one. Okay, we continue. Says the Gemara. We're now about 7 or 8 lines down from the top of the page, just before the brackets. It says Siman Kuza. This is a siman which the Gemara gives in a number of places. Roshei Tevot, the first letter of each, telling you about the next case. It's an easy way to remember. It's a way to remember the order of the Gemara. So Amarav Giddo Amarav. Here's the next case. Kohen she'achal mechatat ve'asham lifnei zrika lokeh. Right. So remember, we learned before about the cases. We learned the different ideas that one cannot eat outside all these different korbanot. One cannot eat them outside the walls of Yerushalayim. We learned the din of eating before Zrikat Adam. We learned the din about a non-Kohen eating them. Right? A number of different factors there. Now, says Rav Giddo Amarav, before we spoke about a non-Kohen eating that which only a Kohen can eat. But what about if you have a Kohen, Shacham Mechatat Ve'asham. So Chatat Ve'asham are Kodshei Kodashim, which means they can only be eaten inside the Azhara, and they can only be eaten by the Kohanim. But what if you have a Kohen she'achal michatat ve'asham lifnei tzrika? So if he was a Kohen who ate from the chatat and the asham before zrikat adam, right, before the blood was sprinkled on the mizbeach, he says Lokeh would be an additional set of Malkot, or it would be additional love as well. We've already seen in this case in our previous pasuk that said Lo tuchal lechol b'sharecha, that we had a love for the Malkot for eating every korban right before Zrikat Adam. He's saying now for Chatat and Hasham there would be an additional one. Why? So we learn out from a pasuk. In the same way we just learned the case of the Olah, right, where it's in the same action, but it's actually included in a number of different lavim. So too we're saying the same thing by the Chatat and Hasham if the Kohen would eat them before Zrikat Adam. So Maitam Adam Akra ve'achlu otam asher kupar bahem. At the full pasuk on the side, this is obviously talking about referring to these korbanot. It says achlu otam asher kupar bahem. We're going to see a little bit later on, we're going to see the conclusion of that pasuk, what that's going to teach us. But for now, we're focusing on the beginning. And it says it relates this idea to kapara. We know that the kapara of the korbanot usually is related to the zrikat adam, to the blood being sprinkled on the mizbeach. So says the pasuk, you will eat them, that which you had kapara through them, right? So, in other words, that it's asher kupar bahem. If it's asher kupar bahem, meaning if it's after kapara, then yes, then ve'achlu otam applies. If it is before kapara, then achlu otam does not apply. I.e., you can only eat them after kapara, after zrikat hadam. Now notice something interesting. This pasuk, again, we're bringing this to show that it is a lav, to show that it is a negative mitzvah, that you're going to get malkot for it. But this pasuk is phrased in the positive. It says, you will eat them. So we're deriving, but that only applies after kapara and not before kapara. So in other words, what the Gemara is telling us here is that we're learning it as a lav haba miklal aseh. So this is another principle, right? We've discussed lav anitak aseh, we've discussed lav shein bo ma'aseh, right? Different ideas. Here we're talking about a lav haba miklal aseh. What does that mean? A lav haba miklal aseh. It means that it's not phrased in the negative. The Torah never tells you, do not do this, but it tells you, do this. And we say, miklal hein ata shomei alav, right? We infer from the positive that which is negative. So that is a lav haba miklal aseh. Do we say, right? So to say that in this case, there's an extra lav, an extra set of Makkot, that only works if you say, lav haba miklal aseh, which not everybody does. Many argue with this, right? So again, let me read from the top. Amarav Gidel Amarav. Kohen shacham mechatat ve'asham lifnei zrika lokeh. Ma'ita. What's the reason why? De'amar krav ve'achlu otam asher kupar b'hem. Le'achar kaparayin lifnei kapara lo. Meaning after kapara, yes, you could eat from them, but therefore we understand that before kapara, before zrikat adam, not. Okay. Lav haba miklala say lavu. So if you say that, you are saying that it's a lav haba miklala say is considered as a lav. That is considered as a prohibition the Torah is telling us. So meitiv Rava. Rava says, wait a minute. Not so simple to say that. Why? For this is going back to Parshat Shavua from last week. Well, week before. The chol be'imam afreset pasav shosat she'asa shtei pasot ma'alat ge'ra ba'be'ema ota tochelu. So in Parshat Shmini, when the Torah tells us about the signs of kosher animals, it says, right, gives us all these signs, kol be'imam afreset palsa, mafreset palsa v'shosat she'asa shtei pasot ma'alat ge'ra ba'be'ema, and then it says ota tochelu. It says that animal which has all of those signs, right, the split hooves and showing the cud, etc. Ota tochelu, that you will eat. Ota tochelu. So what do we learn from those words? Ota tochelu. Ota tochelu ve'en b'ma'acheret tochelu. Meaning you will eat that animal, but you cannot eat. Anything else. It says Rashi over here. Right, Ota tochelu. Rashi near the top, third line. It says Dichtiv kol be'ma mafreset basa v'gomer. Ota tochelu. That you should eat. V'lo be'ma tmeah she'en simanim halalu bo. And not a be'emat tmeah, which does not have these simanim. A couple of weeks ago at Seudah Shlishit, we spoke about the fact that the Torah calls it you see Rashi as well, calls it a be'emat tmeah. Right, in Parshat Noach, the Torah talks about a be'emat tahora, a be'emat sher, einena tahora. It doesn't want to use the word tameh, and from there we learn we're not to speak in a negative fashion, not to even say the words tameh. Whereas in Parshat Shmini, the Torah has no problem saying that it's a be'emat tmeah. And we explain. The difference is that in Parshat Noach, when it's telling us a historical story, so we can be very, very refined with our language, be very, very careful and not say words explicitly. When it comes to Parshat Shmini, it comes to giving psak halacha, telling us what's right and what's wrong. So obviously, if it was something which was very, very degrading sort of language, the Torah would still not use it. But nonetheless, to tell us that. Tell us what we can do and what is permitted, what is forbidden, and we have to be clear and we have to be unequivocal. In any event, says Rashi, lo be'emat tmeah, she'en simanim halalu b'hu, it does not have these simanim, al ma'lav haba miklal aseh. So we understand from that this is a lav haba miklal aseh, that the negative prohibition of the love of eating non-kosher animals is derived from the positive, from the aseh. Right, so meitiv Rabba b'chol mafreset pasav shosat shesa shtei prasot ma'alat ge'ra ba'be'ema ota tochelu ve'en b'ma'acheret tochelu ve'iked. So if that's true, if it's what we've just said, we've just seen that pasuk already teaches us a lav haba miklal aseh, and that would be enough. So if that's correct, that we say lav haba miklal aseh, well then it's zeh lo tochelu lamali. Then why do we need another pasuk that tells us this don't eat? Right? The very next pasuk. If you have a look at the Torah or on the side, the pasuk we've just read was that you shall eat. And the very next pasuk says, but this don't eat. Etc. And then it goes on to list to list those animals that have one of the simanim, but not the other, right? Which is actually, in a sense, symbolically is worse than not having any of the signs, right? Because I'll talk about that. But the point is, if we said lava ba michlanasei, then we already learned that from the first pasuk. Why does the Torah have to come and say it? So from there we learn that in fact we do not say lav haba michlanasei, and therefore the whole nimud of Rav Gidel Amarav falls away. So says the Gemara, okay, so we have to go back, we have to refine. That's in fact not what Rav Gidel Amarav meant to say. It's not that a Kohen who ate from Nichatat ve'Hasham lifnei zrika gets an extra Makkot. That is not what we learn from that pasuk. We learn something else. Amar Rav Gidel Amarav, Zar she'achal mechatat ve'Hasham lifnei zrika patur. Okay, so it changes it quite a lot. First, we said we want to say that is to teach us that the Kohen would get Malkot. Now it's going to teach us, no, it's going to teach us that the Zar is going to be Patur in the sense, meaning the Zar, a non-Kohen, who eats from the Chatat and the Asham, the Chatat or the Asham, we should say, before Zrikat Adam, they are not going to get Malkot, not going to get an additional set of Malkot for that. How do we learn it from the Pasuk? So this is that. Now we need to see that the end of the pasuk said "V'zar lo yochal," right? That which we quoted before. Go back up a few lines to the Gemara. It said "Ve'achlu atam asher kupar bahem." Right? You'll eat it when it's brought kapara, after the zrikat adam. But then the end of the pasuk says "V'zar lo yochal ki kodesh," that a zar, meaning a non-kohen, will not eat from them because this is kodesh. So we learn the following. It's going to be patur. Why? We're about halfway, a bit before halfway down the Amud. Right, the beginning of the pasuk says, and you'll eat them when you have had kapara from them, i.e. when it's after Zrikat Adam. Kol heicha the Karinan Be V'achlu Atam Asher Kupar Bahem. So whenever we read in it, whenever we can apply the case, which is the Reisha of the pasuk, which says V'achlu Atam Asher Kupar Bahem, they can eat them because they've had the kapara. So then we say Karinan Be V'zar Lo Yochal Kodesh. So then we say we in that instance is where we also talk about the end of the pasuk, which is Zar Lo Yochal, that the non-Kohen cannot eat them. And that's going to be allowed. However, kol hecha the lo karinan be v'achlu atam asher kupar bahem, wherever we're not applying this, we're not applying the framework of this pasuk of achlu atam asher kupar bahem, because that is right, because that you haven't yet had the zrikat adam, and therefore that we're not dealing with that, as we just explained. So then lo karinan be v'zar lo yochal. In that case, we don't apply the zar lo yochal either. So therefore, we learn from that if a zar would come and would eat from the chatat or the asham before zrikat adam, that is not the case the pasuk is talking about, and there would be patur from having this additional lav. All right. So that's the korbanot. We now go back to the first case that we brought in our Mishnah.
Rabbi Kenigsberg, at what point is in the process is the zrikat adam?
Well, it's one of the avodot. That's one of that's done of the korban, meaning that the korban is shechted, and then the kohen will have to take the dam and would have to go and sprinkle it on the mizbeach. And it's just to teach you that things have to be done in the proper order. One would have to, meaning that the meat of the korban is there and is available, but one would have to wait until.
Correct. The reason I say that is because if he's saying he's eating it, obviously it's got to be in a way that he can eat it. So I'm just asking, what is the order of the korbanot? Surely the zrikat adam has to be before the eating, because at that point the animal, it's been shechted, they've collected the blood, as you say. Next thing would be that they would throw it on the various corners, and only after that would they perhaps roast it or whatever and eat it. So how come that they could have got that far without having done zrika?
Right. I guess it's just that it's not necessarily the same coin who's doing both. It's not necessarily, it's in different places. Meaning the zrika, the dam is taken, is gone to the mizbeach. The meat, right, is taken somewhere else. Again, the normal course of things, it shouldn't be done. But if for whatever reason it got mixed up, there was delay.
Okay,
I don't know. Yeah. Okay. Beseder. So we now go back to the first din that we had of our Mishnah, right? The first din of our Mishnah was regarding Bikurim. We said in our Mishnah back on Daf Yud Zayin Amud Aleph, we said Aochel Bikurim ad shelo kara aleihem, that if somebody was to eat, the Kohen was to eat from the Bikurim before the Mikra Bikurim had been done, that would be Chayav Malkot. We mentioned that this is a machloket, whether it's the Mikra Bikurim, which is Ma'akev, or whether it's the Hanacha, which is of placing them before the Mizbeach, which is Ma'akev. So we saw that our Mishnah, and we said that was the opinion of Rabbi Shimon and the opinion of Rabbi Akiva, that it's the Mikra Bikurim, which is Ma'akev. So now, says our Gemara, about halfway down the Amud, Samar Rabbi Elazar, Rabbi Yoshaya, Bikurim, Hanacha Ma'akevet Bahen, Kriya Ein Ma'akevet Bahen. So this is the other opinion. This is the other opinion of the, which is not like our Mishnah, which is to say that when it comes to Bikurim, it's the Hanacha of placing them down in front of the Mizbeach, which is Ma'akev. However, the Kriya is not Ma'akev. It says Rabbi Elazar, if you did not do the Mikra Bikurim, that is not a problem, but Yavad, you could still eat those Bikurim. So, Umi Amar Rabbi Elazar Hachi, says the Gemara, is this really true? Is it correct that Rabbi Elazar said such a thing? Because seemingly, we have a proof to the contrary. Ve'amar Rabbi Elazar, Amar Rabbi Yoshaya, Ifrish Bikurim Kodem Lachag, Ve'avar Aleihen Achag, Yeil Rakvu. Right, so if you set aside your Bikurim before the Chag, when the Gemara talks about Chag, it refers to Sukkot. So let's just look at Rashi here for a moment. Rashi over here, so it's not a Dibra Matchil. You'll see, you go up a few lines. The Rashi that says Karina Be V'Zar Lo Yochal. So a few lines after that, there was two dots, and then it says Bikurim Lifnei Achag, B'nei Kriyaninu, Le'achar Achag, Lav B'nei Kriyaninu, Tichtiv B'tar Kriya V'Samachta B'chol Hatov, Me'atzeret V'ad Achag, Shu Zman Simchat Lekitat Perot, Mevi V'Koreh. Okay, so if we go through, I'll read through that again and explain. Based on the Mishnayot in Bikurim. Mishnayot in Bikurim tell us there are different times, although we know that Chag Bikurim is Chag Shavuot. That's the ideal time to bring those first fruits. That's the harvest festival when we bring them to the Beit HaMikdash. But really, one can bring them for many, many months. And the reason for this, of course, as we mentioned, is that it's not easy for everybody to get to the Beit HaMikdash at one time, and think in a world when there are no trains or cars or planes, and it's a long and arduous journey. In any event, so the Mishnah says there are three different time periods regarding Bikurim. So let's just read through Rashi again. It says Bikurim lifnei achag b'nei kriyanin. So if somebody was to bring their Bikurim until Sukkot, so from Shavuot until Sukkot, that is what's called b'nei kriya. Meaning in that time, you would bring the Bikurim and you would say the Psukim, you would read the Mikra Bikurim, as we've mentioned, the normal thing. However, La'achar Chag, if it is after Chag, if it is after Sukkot, so then, Lav B'nei Kriyanin, no longer are they B'nei Kriya, meaning there is no Mikra Bikurim. At that point, one would just bring the Bikurim without reading the Psukim. Explain in a moment why that is. So Bikurim lifnei achag b'nei kriyaninu, le'achar achag lav b'nei kriyaninu. Tichtiv. Why? Because it says in the pasuk, b'tar kriya, after the kriya, v'samachta b'chol hatov, and you will rejoice in all the good. And that v'samachta, we understand, is associated with the Mikra Bikurim. That applies me'atzeret ve'ad achag. That is from the time of Atzeret, from the time of Shavuot until Chag, until Sukkot. Shehu zman simchat lekitat perot. This is the time of happiness of collecting the fruits. It applies from that time. So then we say mevi l'koreh min achag ve'ad Chanukah mevi ve'eino koreh. So there is a time that initial time period one would bring and would until Sukkot one would bring and read. say the Mikra Bikurim, but from the Chag, from Sukkot until Chanukah, one can still bring, but one would not do the Mikra Bikurim. It's very, very interesting, by the way, this whole idea of Chag Bikurim. We think it's Shavuot, but we see that it applies all the way until Chanukah. One of those things we spoke on Pesach. We spoke about how Pesach doesn't end until Shavuot. In a certain sense, Shavuot doesn't end until Chanukah. We're celebrating our Chagim the entire year round. There's interesting reasons, I think, why that is, but we'll leave that for another time. But in any event, so we go back now. So what is our Gemara saying? So we say that there's a time, again, until Sukkot, one could bring the Bikurim with the Mikra Bikurim. So Amar Rabbi Elazar, Amar Rabbi Yoshaya, Ifrish Bikurim Kodim Lachag. So we have an interesting scenario. What happens if you separated your Bikurim, you set them aside and you designated them before Chag, before Sukkot? So that is in the time when you could still do the Mikra Bikurim. However, Avar Alein Chag, but Sukkot passed and you have not yet brought them to the Beit HaMikdash. So now what? Now, if you come and bring them, you cannot do the Mikra Bikurim because it's now after Sukkot. So these, right, that which we said that you bring and you don't read, that is, if you set aside your Bikurim after Chag Sukkot, everybody would agree there. The din of Mikra Bikurim being Makev or not Makev does not apply because there is no Mikra Bikurim. Yeah, it's a bit more complicated because you set them aside when you were meant to do the Mikra Bikurim, and now you can only bring them afterwards. So in such an instance, we say Yerakvu. You have to just let them spoil. You cannot bring those Bikurim. So why can you not bring those Bikurim? Surely it's because you can't say the Mikra Bikurim anymore. You can't read. But this is the opinion of Rabbi Elazar. And we just said Rabbi Elazar said Mikra Bikurim is not Makev. And here it seems to be that it is. So says the Gemara, if you say that the Kriya is not Me'akev, that it does not withhold you from bringing them, so why do you now have to let them rot? Why can't you bring them and just not do the Mikra Bikurim? Right, so answers the Gemara, no, we're still going to say that Rabbi Elazar holds it does not Me'akev generally, but what's the problem? He says, Kid Rabbi Zera. The Amar Rabbi Zera, Kol Hara'oi Lebila, Ein Bila Me'akevet Bo. Okay, so this is a din which is learned out from the Korban Mincha. Sounds like a very, very relevant term of Tefillah. What the din says is as follows. It says, Bila refers to when you mix the flour and the oil in the Korban Mincha, it has to all be mixed in very well. So there is the limit. The Torah tells us that there is a limit in terms of how much flour you can put into the kli for the mincha, because if you put in too much, then it's not going to be able to mix. You're not going to be able to have bilah together with the shemen, together with the oil. And the point is that even if you have too much, that would be pasul, that would not be valid for the korban. If you have the amount which you need, even if it's not mixed in well, that would be okay. But it has to be able to be mixed well. That's what it means. Kol hara oil bilah. Meaning, so long as it is a theoretical possibility, so then the bila itself is not me'akev, it is not withholding. But kol she'enora oila bila me'akev. But if it's not possible for it to, to be mixed in, so then the fact that it's not mixed in would actually be me'akev. So we said the same thing here regarding Bikurim. Rabbi Elazar does not hold that the Mikra Bikurim is me'akev. He says if you don't read the psukim, that's okay. However, you have to be able to read the psukim. If the scenario is that these fruits were designated at a time when Mikra Bikurim was applicable, and now you want to bring them only after Chag, when Mikra Bikurim is not applicable anymore, the fact that you do or don't read the psukim is irrelevant to Rabbi Elazar. The fact that you cannot read the psukim, that is the problem. And therefore we are left with the same conclusion, which is that Rabbi Elazar holds not like Rabbi Akiva and Rabbi Shimon and Rabbi Shimon. He holds that the Mikra Bikurim is not Me'akev, but the Hanacha from the Mizbeach is Me'akev. Okay, so I think we will stop there. Yeshukach to everybody. As I said, unfortunately, it's just the way this week has worked out. This will be the only shiur that we have today. There won't be a shiur tomorrow for Yom HaZikaron. I'm going to be at the cemetery, and then the following day Yom HaTzmaut. We won't have a shiur either. But I look forward to resuming next week with you all.
Yeshikoach, thank you.
Yeshikoach.
Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed. Sure.